Everyone talks about the lights of Las Vegas. The noise is constant, like the city is inhaling and never exhaling. People say you can't feel alone there, not with the music leaking out of every doorway and the crowds moving like a river under neon skies. But 3 or 4 blocks behind the strip, away from the fountains and the billboards, the air changes. The glow thins. The sound gets swallowed by old stucco and faded paint. It feels like stepping off a brightly lit stage into the wings where no one's watching, where the building breathes differently. There are motels back there that you pass without ever seeing, places where the ice machine hasn't worked in years and the vending machine hum is the only proof of electricity. Some of them are cheap, some are forgotten, and some never really empty. These are 3 stories I still wish I hadn't heard. Since then, whenever I see Vegas on TV, it's not the casinos I think about. It's the corridors behind them. I pulled in the first one just before midnight, running on caffeine, fumes, and stubbornness. Everything on the strip was booked for some festival, so my GPS suggested a place a few blocks past Fremont Street. The sign out front used to say Silver Star, but half the bulbs were dead and the ver was dim enough that it read like Sliver. The office smelled like disinfectant and an ashtray that forgot how to be emptied. The woman behind the counter barely looked up. She slid a brass key across to me, the kind you don't see anymore, heavy enough to be noticed in your pocket. I told myself a few hours of sleep and I'd be fine. Room 12 was on the 2nd floor, at the end of a long outdoor hallway lined with metal railings that had flaked paint and a sticky feeling under your hand. The carpet inside the room had that old motel pattern meant to hide stains, which somehow makes them more obvious. I dropped my bag and stood there a second to get used to the hum. Old places hum differently. It wasn't just the air conditioner. It was the ceiling fan grinding a tired rhythm and the mini fridge with a thin whistle like a tea kettle that never makes it to a boil. I turned on the TV to add a human sound and got nothing but static. It didn't bother me at first. Noise is noise. I went to wash my hands and noticed the mirror above the sink had a smear in the shape of a thumb. I rubbed it with a corner of towel. It didn't move. I breathed on the glass to fog it and rubbed again. The smear blurred, then sharpened right back into place like it was behind the surface instead of on it. I told myself I was tired. I told myself a lot of things that night. Sleep came in squares and static. You know when your brain falls just enough that a sound gets pulled into your dream and becomes part of it? That happened with the TV hiss, turning into wind that kept trying to say something. The red numbers on the clock were too bright behind my eyelids. I woke up because the room felt colder and because the TV volume climbed on its own to a point where the static was sharp. The air conditioner had stopped. The ceiling fan had stopped too, but I could still feel the ghost of its movement. The clock said 3:17 a.m. I remember the colon blinking. There were 3 thumps from the wall to my right. Not loud, measured, not like someone asking for help, more like someone agreeing with something they'd already decided. I opened the door to the walkway and stuck my head out. The railing was cool in my palm. The night outside was the kind that makes you think the city took a break. Room 11 had its curtain open a crack. No movement. I knocked anyway. Nothing. When I stepped back into my room, the TV had lowered itself to a softer hiss, the kind that sounds like breath. And the mirror had changed. The smear was longer now. If you stood at the sink and didn't move, it looked like a silhouette over your shoulder. If you shifted even a little, it slipped into a different shape that made your brain do math it didn't want to do. I lifted my phone to record. The camera couldn't find a focus point. The image pulsed like it was underwater. I kept my arm steady and watched my reflection jitter a fraction behind me, like a bad internet call. Then, for just one frame, the kind you could argue later was a glitch, a face formed in the darker part of the glass. Features were there, but not right. The eyes were too pale, like the color had been rinsed out, and the mouth looked like it was learning how to be a mouth. The doorknob behind me made a sound like pressure leaving a seal. I turned and grabbed it. It was warm. It didn't turn. A voice came out of the static, like someone tuning a radio, but liking all the stations at once. I couldn't make words at first, just a pattern. The longer I listened, the more it felt like breathing in reverse, like the sound was pulling the air out of me. I heard something that could have been "don't look at the wall." It could also have been the opposite. My eyes went, because of course they did, to the corner where the wallpaper had a tiny slash. The slash darkened. It spread like a wet mark bleeding through paint. I stepped toward it, and the temperature shifted so fast my skin prickled. The ceiling fan rotated half an inch on its own. Then again, like someone was deciding whether to commit. 3 knocks came from behind the mirror this time. Not from the wall near it. From the mirror itself. A damp pop you feel in your teeth more than your ears. My brain supplied pipes. That was the easiest answer. Then a flat palm pushed out against the glass from the other side. The fingers were long, the knuckles too even. I didn't plan what my body did next. I dropped my phone and swung my fist at the right edge of the mirror. The sound that came back wasn't glass. It was hollow, a door you don't use much. Everything went black, not like a power outage, more like the room closed its eyes. When light came back, the mirror was stupidly clean. I could see the little chips at the bottom of the frame. My reflection blinked after I did. Not long, a half beat. I raised my hand and kept it there. The echo of it stayed a hair too long. I smiled without meaning to, because fear makes your face do things. The face in the glass didn't catch up. Something about that was worse than anything else that night. I must have moved. The next thing I remember, the door was open and I was outside in the quiet, breathing like my ribs were trying to find more room. The light in 12 was humming behind me. Flicker, flicker, hold, the way fluorescent tubes do when they're deciding whether to keep living. The air smelled like the parking lot after rain, even though it was bone dry. I made it down the stairs with my key in my fist like a little brass weapon, and the office door chimed the way every office door chimes, but too loud. The woman at the counter looked at me like I'd walked in on a sentence she'd been saying all night. 12 again, she asked. I nodded, and my throat worked like I'd swallowed sand. She slid an envelope over the counter and dropped the key in. Some doors stay open, she said, even when they look closed. It wasn't a warning. It was a fact she was tired of. When I pulled onto the street, the sign out front did that flicker where the universe seems to breathe with a machine. Silver tried to happen and didn't. Sliver held. In the mirror over. My dashboard, the room mirror found me again, or that's what felt like. It's not rational, but it's true. Ever since, if I look at a mirror too long, my reflection looks like it's thinking about going first. The second story isn't mine. It belongs to a driver who works nights because the city is different then and tips are better when people want to go anywhere but home. He told me he pulled into a place behind the strip with a palm tree logo on a peeling sign, the kind that promised tropical when all it could deliver was shade. He said the man at the desk watched a black and white monitor like it had told him secrets for years and didn't mind being ignored. 27, the man said, and slid him a key that had numbers stamped into it with the kind of tool no one owns anymore. The hallway felt too long, like a lens making a room look bigger than it is. The carpet had that damp feeling only old carpet can have. Not wet enough to blame on a spill, just permanently tired. There was a crack under 27's door and light behind it, which didn't make sense because the outside wall on that side had no windows. He put his ear to the wood and heard nothing that was an answer. Inside, the air smelled like a headache, sweet from old cleaner, sour from whatever people leave behind when they're nervous, metallic from the old coins in the vending machine. He lay down just to shut his eyes, just to go blank for a minute. Footsteps started above him. Slow, heavy. They paused sometimes, right above the bed, and then continued into a space that shouldn't be walkable. When the room phone rang, it was a single bell. He told me that was the worst part. Not a normal ring, just one hit like somebody's breath caught on a note and gave up. When he picked up, the silence had a grain to it, like he was listening to tape instead of a line. Then the breathing came through. Not panicked, not casual. Someone measuring. He said he listened too long and started to adjust his breathing to match it without meaning to. He hung up and the wall behind the bed knocked 3 times. Then quiet laughter. Not from the room next door. From inside the pillow or the headboard. People laugh when they know something you don't, he said, or when they want you to feel like they do. He pressed his palm flat to the wallpaper and heat bled into his hand like the wall had its own fever. When he pulled away, his skin was the wrong color. Rust, he told himself. Old water. Then the smell told him that was a lie. The smell was a penny between your teeth. He grabbed the bed by the metal frame and yanked it away from the wall. The legs squealed in the carpet like an animal. There was a vertical flaw in the plaster that didn't look like a crack until you wanted it to. He put the handle of his toothbrush into it like you test a loose tooth you shouldn't. The wall made a sound he felt in his knees. A low, unhappy sound. Something tapped back, a tiny percussion he could count. He put the handle away and cleared his throat so he wouldn't have to say anything. The room phone rang again, but the sound didn't come from the phone. It came from the wall itself, a recorded ring that buzzed through the plaster like an insect. Each time it rang, a puff of warmer air pushed at his face. He saw the line of the crack move down and widen the smallest amount, then settle again like breath that hadn't decided whether to keep going. A fingernail pushed out first, then the top of the finger. The nail was wrong, ragged and too flat, and left a dot of darker color where it scraped. He kicked the wall because his body decided, and because sometimes you need to show the thing you're still here. The ringing stopped like it had been cut with scissors. After that, nothing made a sound except the inside of his head. Mourning in motels is better than mourning in apartments. Light makes its way through whatever you put between it and the rest of the world. He said he opened his eyes and for a second forgot where he was, which felt like relief until it didn't. The room was the same and different, the way rooms are after you've done something to them in the dark. The fresh paint on the wall where the crack had been was obvious even if it looked like a perfect job. New paint has a smell and an attitude. It wants to be seen. He pressed his palm there again and felt warmth like a living body you're not supposed to touch. He took his questions downstairs and found a woman behind the counter who looked new, not to the job, just to that day. When he asked about the older man, she glanced at the clock like she was checking a story against the time. "We close at midnight," she said, like it had always been that way. When he asked why the light under 27's door had been on, she frowned the way you frown when you hear a number that doesn't exist. "We only go up to 26, she said, and waited like she wasn't sure if he was joking. He walked back down the hall, just to prove he'd misheard something. He said his stomach did that thing where it preps you for disappointment, and you can feel it in your mouth. The corridor ended where it didn't before. Smooth new drywall in a color that tried not to be a color at all. There wasn't a door to 27, but above where it should have been, screwed into the wall at a slight angle, was a small metal plate with the number 27 stamped into it. The same kind of stamping the key had. He took a picture to make the world behave. On the screen, the hallway looked longer than it was. Way down at the end, where the perspective should have met a wall, a person was standing with their back turned, like they were at a door he couldn't see. He told me he deleted the photo, then took it out of the trash, then deleted it again, then checked his phone an hour later to make sure it hadn't come back. The third one is the one that makes me look at phones differently. It came from a woman who worked nights to pay for a course she was taking during the day. The kind of person who makes coffee in old pots and knows which guests will ask for late checkout, just by how they take the pen. It was a Thursday that felt like a Tuesday. She said the ice machine had the hiccups. She said the soda fridge hummed in a key between E and F, and she'd learned to hear it as background. The front door was locked after midnight, like always. At 2:46 a.m., the internal line rang. The internal line is not supposed to be used unless someone presses the right button on a room phone. The display said room 9. Her first hello sounded more confident than she felt. The sound on the other end was breath that had been taught not to be heard. Then a woman's voice, thin and sanded down, said, "Please send someone. He's back." The click was polite. Calls like that make time do weird math. She checked the board because you always check the board first. Room 9 had been closed all week because a plumber had promised to come and then become a story about why he didn't. She took the long flashlight from the drawer and the spare key and told herself she was just going to make sure the door was locked. The hallway to 9 had a window at the end that looked out at a wall, which is a sentence that makes sense in Vegas. The carpet there always felt colder. She put her fingers on the knob and pulled back, surprised by how cold the metal was. Not cool. Cold like a bag of ice. The lock turned, which it shouldn't have, and the door opened into a dark that felt old, like the darkness in a room that remembers being a closet. She thumbed the switch. Nothing. Her light made a cone that showed a made bed and a phone off the hook on the nightstand. The hiss coming out of it sounded like standing outside when snow starts and the world decides to muffle itself. She put the receiver back in its cradle with 2 fingers like that would help. The phone on the front desk downstairs rang immediately, clear through the floor. She startled hard enough that her flashlight jumped in her hand and went back down fast, meeting her own reflection in the glass of the office door like a person you're not pleased to see. The desk phone said front office, even though she hadn't called herself. When she picked up, the same whisper uncoiled into her ear. "You took too long." It could have been irritation. It sounded more like a fact being written down. She looked at the paper logbook because the computer system had been replaced by one that was worse. Room 9, which had been crossed out all week with a note about leak, now had a neat line in black ink. Linda Myers, check-in 2:45 a.m. The handwriting looked like hers when she took her time. She looked up at the camera monitor and flipped through the views until she found the hallway outside 9. The door was open just a little. The light inside flickered off, then on, then held. For about 1 second, a figure slid across the crack sideways, the way you see someone when they're walking past a slightly open bathroom door. The movement was wrong by being right. Natural speed played backward. She went back up because that's her job, and because curiosity and dread are cousins. The door to 9 had settled, closed again. When she pushed it with her toe, it moved like it had a person on the other side deciding whether to help. Inside, the room was perfectly made. Lights on, bed corners tucked tight. The air was colder, but smelled like someone had sprayed too much floral cleaner an hour ago to cover something that never really gets covered. She stood in front of the mirror because that's where your eyes go in unfamiliar rooms. The room looked back. The bed looked back. The lamp looked back. She did not. She lifted one hand and nothing lifted in the glass. She moved left. The room didn't shift. The mirror had made a decision about what it reflected and decided it didn't include her. The phone on the nightstand rang. Not the desk phone. This one, right here. She answered because you answer. The same voice said, "He's here," like reading what was embroidered on a shirt. The walls pulsed in and out softly with the words, not enough to knock anything, but enough to make you think you might be swaying. The door closed behind her and latched without a hand. The TV turned on to the camera feed from the hallway, which she didn't know the TV could do. On the screen, she saw herself standing outside the door holding the phone, even though her hand was on the receiver in the room. The version of her on the screen turned her head toward the camera and smiled a slow, patient smile a person makes when they have time. The screen went black like the eye of it shut. When she woke, she was in the chair behind the front desk with the phone off the hook beside her, ringing at measured intervals that made it feel like a heart monitor. The clock said 3:07. The front door glass showed her reflection. That one worked. The logbook showed room 9 occupied. The name on the line matched the one on her badge. She told me. She pressed her thumb to each letter until her skin squeaked on the paper, like you can erase ink with friction. The phone rang again. She picked it up because the human brain wants loops to finish. Static, breathing, then her own voice. "Please send someone. He's back." She didn't hang up. The other her did. On the camera feed, the door to 9 was open a little again. The light inside made a rectangle on the hallway carpet. In that shape, a woman stood a few feet from the bed, her shoulder toward the door, holding a phone to her ear. The angle wasn't good enough to see the face. The hair was right. The uniform was right. The stillness was precise. She said she watched until the image rolled once, then steadied, then rolled again like the building had a stomach that didn't agree with something it had eaten. Sometimes the phone rings in her apartment now, and she waits one ring too long to answer. Old habits, old loops. Las Vegas does what it's supposed to do. It keeps your eyes up and your wallet open and your nights a little too short. People go there to forget there's anything behind anything. But there are blocks behind the strip where the glow feels like an echo and the streets make a sound like someone shushing you from a few feet away. The ice machines there don't work, but they still hum just in case. The old keys still have weight. There are rooms where the air is colder than the hall and mirrors that remember more than they reflect. Maybe the city isn't haunted. Maybe it's just very good at holding on. The desert doesn't make ghosts. It keeps them from blowing away. If you ever find yourself behind the strip because the nice places are full or Because you told yourself you're only going to sleep for a few hours. Look at the sign twice to see what letters didn't light. Not before you use the key. Watch the mirror long enough to know if it's keeping up with you. If the phone rings once in the middle of a thought, decide if you need to know who's on the other end. And if the clock says anything after 3, don't ask the building for answers. It will give you the ones it's been waiting to give. If you want more stories like these, the ones people tell low because they don't want the lights to hear, you already know where to find them.